September 14th, 1889. When cattle rancher Marcus Brennan discovered 5 hollow-eyed children huddled in his supply wagon, stealing scraps of dried meat, he reached for his rifle. But then their mother stumbled from the shadows, bruised and trembling, and whispered words that would shatter his carefully guarded heart. "Please, take me too." Would this broken family become his redemption, or would the powerful man hunting them destroy everything Marcus had left to lose? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly under a sky the color of old bruises, promising rain that never came. Marcus Brennan wiped sweat from his brow and cursed the drought that had turned his 1,000-acre ranch into a graveyard of dying cattle and broken dreams. He'd driven his supply wagon into Dodge City at dawn, spent his last decent money on flour, salt pork, and enough grain to maybe, just maybe, keep his remaining livestock alive through another week. The trip back would take 4 hours across open country, and Marcus wanted to be home before the rattlesnakes came out for their evening hunt. The wagon felt heavier than it should, the horses straining more than usual. Marcus chalked it up to the heat until he heard it. A soft whimper, barely audible over the creak of wheels and the rhythmic clop of hooves. He reined the horses to a stop, his hand moving instinctively to the Winchester rifle beside him. Bandits had been working this stretch of territory for months. 3 ranchers ambushed, 2 killed, 1 left for dead with a bullet in his spine. Marcus wasn't about to become the 4th. He climbed down slowly, rifle raised, circling to the back of the wagon. The canvas cover was tied shut, exactly as he'd left it. But the sound came again. Not a man's sound, something smaller, weaker. Marcus yanked the canvas aside and froze. 5 pairs of eyes stared back at him from skeletal faces. Children. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10. The youngest perhaps 3. All of them so thin, their bones seemed ready to break through papery skin. They huddled together in the far corner of his wagon bed, trembling despite the oppressive heat. The oldest child, a girl with tangled auburn hair and hollow cheeks, held a piece of his salt pork in her dirt-crusted hands. She'd been gnawing on it like a starving animal, and now she stared at Marcus with the resigned terror of someone expecting death. "Don't shoot," she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. "Please don't shoot. We're just so hungry." Marcus lowered the rifle slowly, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. These weren't street urchins playing a con. This was genuine starvation, the kind he'd seen during the war, in prisoner camps where men became walking corpses. "How long have you been in my wagon?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "Since this morning, in town. We climbed in while you were at the feed store." The girl's eyes darted to his rifle, then back to his face. "We weren't stealing. We needed—" "You were stealing," Marcus corrected, "but there was no heat in it. Question is why?" Before the girl could answer, a sound came from beyond the wagon, a rustle in the tall grass that lined the road. Marcus spun, rifle rising again, and that's when he saw her. A woman stumbled into view, her dress torn and filthy, one eye swollen nearly shut, dried blood crusted at the corner of her mouth. She couldn't have been more than 30, but suffering had carved decades into her face. She swayed on her feet, barely able to stand, but her eyes locked onto the children with desperate love. "Don't hurt them," she gasped, taking a faltering step forward. "Please, they're mine. All mine. I told them to hide, to find food. It's my fault. Punish me, not them." She collapsed to her knees, and Marcus saw the bruises circling her throat like a necklace of violence. Saw the way she held her ribs, the blood seeping through her dress from wounds he couldn't see. "Please," she whispered, and the word carried the weight of absolute desperation. "Please take me too." Marcus had spent the last 3 years building walls around his heart. After losing his wife Rebecca to childbirth and the baby daughter he'd held for exactly 17 minutes before she stopped breathing, he'd sworn off involvement, off caring, off letting anyone close enough to hurt him again. His ranch had become his fortress, his isolation and his armor, but something in this woman's eyes breached every defense. Not her beauty, though he could see it beneath the damage. Not pity, though God knew she deserved it. It was recognition. The look of someone who'd stared into the abyss and found it staring back. The look he'd seen in his own mirror for 3 years. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. "My husband." The words came out flat, emotionless. Former husband, Clayton Mercer. Marcus knew the name. Everyone in the 3 counties knew Clayton Mercer. He owned the largest cattle operation in Kansas, with political connections reaching all the way to the territorial governor. He was rich, powerful, and mean as a snake, with its tail caught in a trap. "Mercer's wife ran off 6 months ago," Marcus said slowly. "Took his children. He's had men searching everywhere. Posted rewards. I didn't run off." Her laugh was bitter as alkali water. "I escaped. There's a difference." The oldest girl climbed down from the wagon, moving to her mother's side with the protective instinct of someone forced to grow up too fast. "Papa said he'd kill us if we ever left. Said Mama was his property and we were his blood, and nobody takes what belongs to Clayton Mercer." "Hush, Charlotte," the woman said, but there was no real proof in it. She looked up at Marcus, her good eye pleading. "I know what you're thinking, that I should go back. That a woman's place is with her husband no matter what. That those children need their father." "I'm thinking," Marcus interrupted, "that any man who'd do this to a woman and starve his own children isn't a husband or a father. He's a monster." Hope flickered across her battered face, tentative and fragile. "Then you'll help us?" Marcus should have said no. Should have driven them straight to the sheriff in Dodge City and let the law sort it out. Clayton Mercer had judges in his pocket, politicians in his debt, and enough hired guns to start a small war. Taking in his runaway wife and children would be like painting a target on his own back, but he looked at those 5 starving children, looked at their mother, beaten half to death, but still fighting to protect them, looked at the eldest girl, Charlotte, who couldn't have been more than Rebecca's age when he'd married her, already carrying the weight of a woman's fears on a child's shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked the woman. Grace Mercer." She paused. "Grace Holloway, I mean. I'm taking back my maiden name. I'm done being his. All right, Grace Holloway. Here's what's going to happen. You and your children are going to get in this wagon. I'm going to take you to my ranch. You're going to eat, sleep, and heal. And then we're going to figure out what comes next. Mr. Brennan, just Marcus. And before you start thanking me, understand something. Clayton Mercer will come looking. When he finds out I've got you, he's going to make my life hell. I'm not doing this because I'm noble or heroic. I'm doing it because those children are starving and you're hurt, and I can't live with myself if I leave you here." Grace nodded slowly, tears tracking through the dirt on her face. "Why are you helping us? You don't know us." Marcus thought about Rebecca, about how she'd begged for water near the end, while the fever consumed her. Thought about how the doctor had been too drunk to save her, too incompetent to save their daughter. Thought about how he'd screamed at God and gotten only silence in return. "Let's just say I know what it's like when nobody helps," he said quietly. "Come on, let's get you home." He helped Grace into the wagon, trying not to notice how she flinched at his touch, how her whole body tensed as if expecting a blow. The children climbed in after her, moving with the efficiency of practice. They'd been running for a long time, Marcus realized. Long enough to know how to hide, how to stay quiet, how to disappear at a moment's notice. "What are your names?" he asked. As he climbed back onto the driver's seat, Charlotte answered, pointing to each child in turn. "I'm Charlotte. I'm 10. That's Benjamin. He's 8. That's twin Samuel and Sarah. They're 6. And that's little Michael. He just turned 3. Michael, the youngest, stared at Marcus with huge blue eyes, sucking his thumb. The boy looked like a strong wind could blow him away. They all did. "When did you last eat?" "A real meal, I mean." The children looked at each other, then at their mother. Grace's voice was barely audible. 4 days ago. We found a homestead, abandoned. There was a root cellar with some old potatoes. Before that, I can't remember. 4 days. Marcus felt anger building in his chest, hot and fierce. What kind of man let his own children starve? What kind of monster beat a woman and then hunted her like an animal when she tried to save herself and her babies? The kind who needed to be stopped. The ride to the ranch took 3 hours, Marcus pushing the horses harder than he should have. Behind him, he could hear Grace murmuring to the children, her voice soft and soothing despite her injuries. Once he glanced back and saw her cradling Michael, the boy finally asleep in her arms, his tiny face peaceful for the first time since Marcus had found them. The Brennan ranch house appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent. It wasn't much, just a simple 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and a barn that had seen better days. But it was solid, built to last, and most importantly, it was defensible. Marcus would need that, he thought grimly. When Clayton Mercer came calling and he would come, Marcus wanted to be ready. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He pulled the wagon up to the house and helped Grace and the children down. They stood in a small cluster, uncertain, like wild animals, unsure if they'd found sanctuary or another trap. "Charlotte, Benjamin," Marcus said, addressing the 2 oldest. "There's a pump around back. Get your brothers and sister washed up. Grace, you come with me. I've got medical supplies inside." Grace hesitated, years of abuse making her wary of being alone with any man. Marcus saw it in her eyes and understood. "Charlotte can come too," he said quietly. "As a chaperone. Would that be all right?" The relief on Grace's face was answer enough. Inside, the house was sparse but clean. Marcus had never been one for decoration, and after Rebecca died, he'd stripped away anything that reminded him of her. The result was functional but cold, a house where someone existed rather than lived. He directed Grace to a chair in the kitchen, then rummaged through his medical supplies. Rebecca had insisted they keep a well-stocked kit, her practical nature always planning for emergencies. He'd never imagined he'd be using it for this. "This is going to hurt," he warned, as he approached with clean water and bandages. "Your ribs are probably broken. That cut above your eye needs cleaning, and I need to check that you're not bleeding internally." "I'm fine," Grace said automatically, the reflexive lie of someone who'd learned to hide their pain. "You're not fine. You're half dead. But you're going to be fine, because I'm not going to let you die in my kitchen." Charlotte stood by her mother's side, holding her hand as Marcus worked. The girl was brave, he noticed. Didn't flinch when Grace gasped in pain, just squeezed tighter and whispered encouragement. As Marcus cleaned the wounds, Grace told her story. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. How Clayton Mercer had courted her when she was just 18, fresh off the farm, dazzled by his wealth and charm. How he'd changed after the wedding, the charm evaporating to reveal the cruelty beneath. How he'd isolated her from her family, controlled every aspect of her life, used his fists when she didn't comply quickly enough. How she'd endured it for the children's sake, believing the lie that a bad father was better than no father. Until the night he'd beaten Benjamin so severely the boy couldn't walk for a week. All because he'd spilled milk at dinner. That's when Grace knew she had to run or watch her children die. Slowly or quickly, but die all the same. "We've been hiding for 6 months," she said, wincing as Marcus wrapped her ribs, moving from town to town, never staying long. "He's got men everywhere asking questions, showing our pictures. We were in Dodge City trying to figure out where to go next when we saw your wagon. We were so hungry, and the children—" Her voice broke and Charlotte squeezed her hand again. "You did what you had to do," Marcus said firmly. "No shame in that. There's shame in stealing. There's survival in stealing when the alternative is death. Don't confuse the two." He finished bandaging her and stepped back. "You need rest. Real rest, not whatever you've been doing these past months. Upstairs, second door on the right. There's a bed. Use it. The children, I'll feed them. You rest." Grace looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. Charlotte helped her mother stand, and Marcus watched them climb the stairs slowly. Grace moving like every step cost her. Outside, he could hear the other children at the pump, their voices high and excited. Water, such a simple thing. But to children who'd been running and hiding for months, it must have seemed like a miracle. Marcus went to the kitchen and started cooking. It'd been a while since he'd made a meal for more than one, and he found himself oddly nervous. These children had been through hell. They deserved better than his rough frontier cooking. He made stew, thick with the vegetables from his struggling garden and chunks of salted beef. Made biscuits from the flour he'd just bought. Set the table for 6, then stared at it for a long moment. 6. When was the last time 6 people had sat at this table? Before Rebecca died, before his daughter died, before his world had shrunk to just him and his grief. The children came in quietly, Benjamin helping little Michael, the twins holding hands. They stared at the food like they couldn't quite believe it was real. "Sit," Marcus said, gesturing to the table. "Eat, but slowly. Your stomachs aren't used to full meals. Too much too fast will make you sick." They obeyed with the discipline of children who'd learned to follow orders without question. It broke his heart a little, watching them eat with such careful restraint, when he could see they wanted to devour everything in sight. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, having settled her mother upstairs. "Is Mama going to be all right?" she asked, her voice small for the first time. "Yes," Marcus said, with more certainty than he felt. "She's going to be all right. You all are. Papa will come for us. I know. He'll hurt you. He hurts everyone who tries to help us." Marcus looked at this 10-year-old girl who'd been forced to think like an adult, to carry burdens no child should carry. "Let me worry about your papa. You just worry about being a kid again. Deal?" Charlotte studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Deal." As the children ate and the sun set over the Kansas prairie, Marcus stood at the window and watched the horizon. Somewhere out there, Clayton Mercer was looking for his family, and when he found them, when he discovered they were here, there would be hell to pay. But Marcus had been to hell already, had lived there for 3 years, in this empty house with his empty life. Maybe, just maybe, these desperate strangers who'd crawled into his wagon seeking salvation might be his own way out of the darkness. Or maybe they'd all burn together. Either way, the choice was made. The die was cast, and Marcus Brennan, who'd thought he was done caring about anything or anyone, found himself caring very much indeed about 5 starving children and their broken mother, who'd whispered, "Please take me too. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles." Tonight there was food and safety and the small mercy of rest. For now that would have to be enough. Marcus woke before dawn to the sound of crying. For a disoriented moment he thought he'd traveled back in time, that Rebecca was upstairs with their daughter, that the last 3 years had been nothing but a nightmare. Then reality crashed back, and he remembered the 5 children sleeping in his spare rooms, their mother recovering from wounds that made his stomach turn. He found little Michael in the hallway, tears streaming down his face, calling for his mama in a voice thick with sleep and fear. The boy stood there in a nightshirt Marcus had cobbled together from an old sheet, looking lost and terrified. "Hey now," Marcus said softly, kneeling to the child's level. "Your mama's resting. She's right in there." He pointed to the closed door. Michael stared at him with those enormous blue eyes, lower lip trembling. The boy had barely spoken since arriving, and Marcus wondered what horrors this 3-year-old had witnessed that left him so silent. "Want to help me with the chickens?" Marcus tried. "I bet they're wondering where their breakfast is." The distraction worked. Michael's crying stopped, curiosity replacing fear. He slipped his tiny hand into Marcus's calloused one, and something in Marcus's chest cracked open at the trust in that gesture. They walked outside into the pearl-grey dawn, Michael's small steps hurrying to keep up. The chickens clucked and fussed in their coop, and Marcus showed the boy how to scatter feed, how to check for eggs in the nesting boxes. Michael's face lit up when he found his first egg, holding it like it was made of gold. "Gentle now," Marcus said. "That's breakfast right there." By the time they returned to the house, the other children were stirring. Charlotte had taken charge, as she seemed to do naturally, helping the twins wash their faces while Benjamin attempted to comb his hair with his fingers. They all froze when they saw Marcus, that wariness returning. "Morning," he said, setting down the basket of eggs. "Who knows how to cook?" Charlotte raised her hand hesitantly. "Mama taught me, before we left." "Good, you can teach me. I burn everything that isn't stew. It wasn't entirely true, but the lie served its purpose. Charlotte relaxed slightly, stepping into the familiar role of helper. Together they made scrambled eggs and fried the last of his bacon. The kitchen filled with the smell of food and something else. Something Marcus hadn't experienced in years, the chaotic warmth of a family morning. Grace appeared in the doorway, just as they were sitting down to eat. She moved stiffly, one hand pressed to her bandaged ribs, but her face had more color than yesterday. The swelling around her eye had gone down enough that she could open it halfway. "You should be resting," Marcus said, rising to pull out a chair for her. "I've rested enough." Grace's voice was stronger today, though still rough. "The children are fine. Michael and I collected eggs. Charlotte's been teaching me to cook. Everyone's fed and in one piece." Grace sank into the chair, and Marcus saw the relief wash over her. How long had she been carrying everything alone? 6 months of running, hiding, protecting 5 children with no help from anyone? "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of this. Eat first. Talk later." They ate in companionable silence, the children stealing glances at Marcus when they thought he wasn't looking. He pretended not to notice, giving them time to adjust to his presence, to learn he wasn't a threat. After breakfast, Marcus sent the children outside to play while he and Grace remained at the table. Charlotte protested, leaving her mother. But Grace insisted, and finally the girl relented. Though she kept looking back through the window. "She doesn't trust easily," Grace said, watching her daughter. "None of them do anymore. Can't blame them. Not after what they've been through." Grace wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, staring into the dark liquid like it held answers. "You're wondering why I stayed as long as I did. Why didn't I leave sooner? I'm not wondering anything. Your choices were yours to make. Everyone wonders. The women in town used to whisper, 'Why doesn't she leave him? Why does she put up with it?'" Grace's laugh was bitter, as if leaving was simple, as if Clayton didn't control every penny, every decision, every moment of my life. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. Even battered and exhausted, Grace Holloway had a strength about her that reminded him of Rebecca. That same steel core wrapped in softness, that determination to protect what mattered most. "You don't owe me your story," he said. "But if you're going to stay here, even temporarily, I need to know what I'm up against. Tell me about Clayton Mercer." Grace took a shaky breath. "Where do I start? With the courtship, when he was charming and generous? With the wedding night, when I first saw the cruelty in his eyes? Or with the first time he hit me, 3 months after we married, because I'd smiled at a shopkeeper? Start wherever you need to." So she did. The words poured out, years of pain and fear compressed into 30 minutes of quiet confession. She told him about Clayton's obsession with control, how he'd isolated her from her family, convinced her that no one else would want her, that she was lucky he tolerated her inadequacies. She told him about the escalating violence, how he'd broken her arm once and then stood over her while she lied to the doctor about falling downstairs. She told him about the children, how Clayton viewed them as possessions rather than people, how he'd forced Benjamin to work in the fields at 6 years old, beating him when he couldn't keep up with the adult ranch hands, how he'd locked the twins in a cellar for a full day as punishment for laughing too loudly at dinner, how he'd threatened to send Charlotte to a workhouse if she didn't learn proper obedience. "The night we left," Grace said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, "he came home drunk and in a rage. One of his business deals had fallen through. He blamed me, said I'd cursed him with my presence. He beat me until I couldn't stand. Then he turned on Benjamin." Her hands shook, coffee sloshing in the cup. "I saw him reach for his belt, saw the look in his eyes, and I knew. I knew if I didn't get the children out right then, one of us wouldn't survive the night. Maybe all of us. So you ran. I waited until he passed out. Took the children and nothing else. No money, no supplies, just the clothes on our backs. We walked 15 miles that night to the nearest town. I've been running ever since." Marcus absorbed this, his anger at Clayton Mercer solidifying into something cold and purposeful. "He's been looking for you, everywhere. He's posted rewards, hired men to search, not because he loves us, but because we're his property. Clayton doesn't let go of what belongs to him. You don't belong to him." Neither do those children. Try telling that to the law. I'm still legally his wife. Those children are still legally his. If he finds us, if he hauls us back to his ranch, there's not a judge in Kansas who'll rule against him." She was right, and they both knew it. The law favored husbands, gave them near absolute authority over their wives and children. A man could beat his family half to death and face no consequences. Especially if that man was rich and influential like Clayton Mercer. "Then we don't let him find you," Marcus said simply. Grace looked up sharply. "You can't hide us forever. This ranch isn't remote enough. People will talk. Someone will mention seeing children here, and Clayton will put the pieces together. Let him. This is my property. He can't just waltz in and take you." "Yes, he can. He has the law on his side, and the money to buy whatever the law won't give him freely." Marcus stood, walking to the window where he could see the children playing. Benjamin was teaching the twins how to skip stones at the water trough, while Charlotte supervised, and Michael was digging in the dirt with a stick. Simple joys, the kind children should have every day. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said suddenly. "Childbirth. Our daughter died too, 17 minutes after she was born. Doctor was supposed to come, but he was drunk. By the time he stumbled to our door, it was too late." Grace's sharp intake of breath told him she understood why he was sharing this. "I'm sorry. After they died, I didn't care about much of anything. Kept the ranch running because it was something to do, but I was just going through motions. Waiting, I guess, for my own end." He turned to face her. "Then yesterday, I found 5 starving children in my wagon, and their mother begging me to save them too. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt something besides emptiness. Anger at what was done to you. Determination to protect those kids. Purpose. Marcus, I'm not asking you to stay forever. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to do what's right. Let me help you. Let me give those children a few weeks where they're not hungry and scared. Let me give you time to heal and figure out your next move. And when Clayton comes, when he brings his hired guns and the sheriff and whoever else he's bought, then I'll deal with it." Grace studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the distinct impression he was being measured against some internal standard. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but I want to contribute. I can cook, clean, help with the ranch work once I'm healed. I won't be a burden. You're not. I need to be useful, Marcus. These past 6 months, I've been nothing but a frightened woman running with frightened children. Let me be more than that. Let me help." There was pride in her request, a need to maintain dignity despite her circumstances. Marcus understood that. "Kitchen's yours if you want it. Lord knows I could use someone who knows their way around a stove." The relief in her eyes was profound. They had reached an understanding, an alliance born of necessity, but already showing hints of something deeper. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. 2 broken people who'd found each other at exactly the moment they both needed saving. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Grace's strength returned gradually, and with it her natural capability. She took over the household management with quiet efficiency, transforming Marcus's bachelor existence into something resembling a home. The children slowly relaxed, their constant vigilance easing as they realized no immediate threat was coming. Benjamin started following Marcus around the ranch, asking endless questions about cattle and horses and how everything worked. The boy was hungry for a father figure, for someone who would teach without yelling, explain without punishment. Marcus found himself enjoying the role, rediscovering patience he'd thought lost. The twins, Samuel and Sarah, were inseparable and wild, their personalities emerging now that fear no longer suppressed them. They climbed everything, explored everywhere, and kept Charlotte in a constant state of maternal anxiety. Marcus would find them in the barn loft, in the chicken coop, once even on the roof, and he couldn't bring himself to scold them. They were learning to be children again. Charlotte remained watchful, her guard never fully down. She helped her mother with chores, watched over her younger siblings, and studied Marcus with assessing eyes that seemed far too old for 10 years. He knew she was the one he'd need to win over completely, the protector who would sound the alarm if anything felt wrong. Michael attached himself to Marcus like a small shadow. The boy barely spoke, but he was always there, holding onto Marcus's pant leg or watching from a few feet away with those enormous blue eyes. It broke Marcus's heart and healed it simultaneously. This wordless trust from a child who'd learned trust was dangerous. On the fourth evening, as Marcus was teaching Benjamin how to properly groom a horse, a rider appeared on the horizon. Grace saw him first from the kitchen window, and Marcus heard her sharp cry of alarm. He handed the brush to Benjamin and moved toward the house, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. The rider was alone, an older man on a tired-looking mare. As he got closer, Marcus recognized him. Thomas Webster, owner of the neighboring ranch 5 miles east. They'd been friendly once before Rebecca died, before Marcus had withdrawn from all social contact. "Marcus," Webster called out, reining his horse to a stop. "It's been a while, Thomas. What brings you out this way?" Webster's eyes flickered toward the house, where Grace stood visible in the window, the children clustering around her. "Heard you had visitors. Wanted to check if everything was all right." "Everything's fine. Just some folks passing through, staying a spell." "That's so?" Webster's tone was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. "Funny thing, Marcus. Clayton Mercer's been riding through the county with some of his men, showing people pictures of his wife and kids. Says they were kidnapped by outlaws, offering a substantial reward for information." Marcus felt Grace's fear from across the yard. "That's not what happened." "Didn't figure it was. Mercer's got a reputation. Most folks around here know what kind of man he is, even if they don't say it out loud. Why are you telling me this, Thomas?" Webster shifted in his saddle. "Because I remember Rebecca. Remember how you two had something real. And I remember when you lost her, lost yourself too. The whole county watched you die inside." He gestured toward the house. "But just now, when I rode up, I saw you teaching that boy how to handle a horse." "Saw you smile at him. First time I've seen you smile in 3 years, Marcus. Whatever's happening here, it's bringing you back to life. Figured you deserved fair warning about what's coming. Mercer doesn't know they're here yet?" "Not yet, but he will. Someone will talk eventually, for money or fear, or just because people talk. You've got maybe a week, maybe less, before he shows up at your door. What would you do, Thomas? In my place?" Webster was quiet for a long moment. "I'd do exactly what you're doing. And when Mercer came, I'd remind him that a man's property ends at his fence line, and he's got no business on mine." He turned his horse to leave, then paused. "Marcus, there are more folks like me than you think. Folks who are tired of men like Clayton Mercer thinking money makes them untouchable. When trouble comes, and it will come, you won't be facing it alone." After Webster rode off, Marcus returned to the house. Grace stood in the kitchen, her face pale. Children gathered protectively around her. "He knows," she whispered. "Yes, Clayton. We'll come. Yes, we should leave. Tonight, before we bring disaster down on you." Marcus looked at the 5 children, at their mother, who'd fought so hard to save them, looked at the life that had unexpectedly bloomed in his empty house over just 4 days, looked at the future stretching before them, uncertain but suddenly full of possibility. "No," he said firmly. "You're not running anymore. We face this together, all of us." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Why? Why would you risk everything for people you barely know?" "Because you're not just people," Marcus thought. "You're the reason I remembered how to care. You're the family I thought I'd never have again. You're my second chance at living instead of just existing." But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he simply replied, "Because it's the right thing to do." Outside, the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Somewhere out there, Clayton Mercer was hunting his escaped property, getting closer with every passing hour. A storm was coming, violent and inevitable. But for tonight, there was dinner to prepare, children to tend, and the small blessing of safety. Tomorrow would bring its own trials. Tonight, they had each other, and for now, that was enough. The warning came exactly 6 days after Thomas Webster's visit. Marcus was mending a fence line on the eastern boundary when he spotted dust rising in the distance. Not one rider, but many. He counted 8 as they drew closer, and his gut tightened when he recognized the man leading them. Clayton Mercer sat on his horse, like a king, surveying his domain. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the arrogance in his posture, the expensive cut of his suit, the gleam of silver on his saddle. The 7 men flanking him were clearly hired muscle, hands resting casually near their weapons. Marcus set down his tools and walked to meet them at the property line, his own pistol loaded but holstered. He'd known this moment was coming, had prepared for it mentally, if not emotionally. Mercer reined his horse to a stop, looking down at Marcus with cold grey eyes that held no warmth, no humanity. This was a man who viewed people as objects, resources to be exploited, or obstacles to be removed. "You must be Brennan," Mercer said, his voice smooth as oil. "I'm Clayton Mercer. I believe you have something that belongs to me. I have a ranch, some cattle, and my own business, none of which belongs to you." Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't play games. My wife and children were seen here. I'm here to collect them. They're not yours to collect. Grace made her choice to leave." "Grace?" Mercer spoke the name with contempt. "That woman doesn't have the sense God gave a mule. She's hysterical, unstable. Probably filled your head with lies about me. Didn't need her to tell me anything." The bruises spoke loud enough. The smile vanished from Mercer's face. "What happens in a man's home between him and his wife is nobody's business. Now bring them out and we can end this peacefully. No, one word. Simple, final, unbreakable." Mercer's jaw tightened. "You're harboring my legal property. That's theft under territorial law. I can have the sheriff here within the hour. Then have him come. I'll explain to him how a man beats his wife half to death and starves his own children. Let's see how legal that sounds, you sanctimonious fool." Mercer's mask of civility cracked. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I own half this county. Judges, sheriffs, politicians, they all answer to me. You're nothing but a dirt farmer playing the hero. Maybe so. But this dirt farmer is standing between you and that family, and I'm not moving." One of Mercer's men, a scarred brute with dead eyes, leaned toward his boss. "Want us to handle this, Mr. Mercer?" "Not yet, Jackson. Let's give Mr. Brennan time to reconsider his foolish nobility." Mercer turned his attention back to Marcus. "I'm a patient man, Brennan. I'll give you until sunset tomorrow. Return to my family and I'll forget this ever happened. Refuse, and I'll bury you so deep nobody will remember your name." "I remember what happened to the Richards family," Marcus said quietly, "when they stood up to you about water rights. Their barn burned down. Their oldest son got shot, called it a hunting accident. They left the territory within a month." Mercer's smile returned, cruel and satisfied. "Accidents happen on the frontier, especially to people who don't know when to mind their own affairs. That a threat?" "That's a fact. Tomorrow's sunset, Brennan. Make the smart choice." They rode off in a cloud of dust, and Marcus stood there watching until they disappeared from view. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of not drawing his gun and ending Clayton Mercer right there. But that would make him a murderer, and more importantly, it would leave Grace legally bound to a dead man's estate, tangled in courts and investigations for years. He returned to the house to find Grace standing on the porch, her face ashen. She'd seen everything from the window. "He's coming back," she said, "not a question. Tomorrow at sunset, with the law on his side, most likely. Then we leave now, tonight, before he can—" "Grace." Marcus climbed the porch steps and gently took her shoulders. "Running is what he expects. It's what he wants. Keep you scared and moving so you never have time to fight back. Fighting is suicide. You don't understand what he's capable of. I understand he's a bully with money. I've dealt with his type before." Grace pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "No, you haven't. Clayton doesn't just beat people down, Marcus. He destroys them. Systematically, methodically. He finds what you love and takes it away piece by piece until there's nothing left but ruins. Then he's going to be disappointed, because I don't have anything left for him to take." The words came out harsher than Marcus intended. "Except you and those children, and he's not getting his hands on you again." Charlotte appeared in the doorway, Benjamin right behind her. They'd been listening, of course. "Children always did. We should go," Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We've brought you nothing but trouble, Mr. Brennan. We can't let Papa hurt you too." Marcus crouched down to Charlotte's level. "Your Papa doesn't get to decide what happens on my land. And you know what? I'm tired of men like him thinking they can take whatever they want just because they have money and guns. But he'll kill you." Benjamin whispered, "Maybe, or maybe it's time someone stood up to him and didn't back down." That evening, Marcus rode to Thomas Webster's ranch. He needed allies, and he needed them fast. Webster welcomed him with whiskey and a knowing look. "Mercer came calling, I take it. Gave me until tomorrow sunset to hand over Grace and the children. And you said?" "No." Webster poured them both drinks. "That's gonna get you killed, Marcus. You know that, right?" "Probably. But I can't live with the alternative." They sat in silence for a moment, two men who'd seen enough of life to know that some stands had to be made regardless of the cost. "What do you need?" Webster asked finally. "Witnesses. When Mercer comes back with the sheriff, I need people who can testify to what really happened. People he can't buy off or intimidate. That's a tall order. Mercer's got deep pockets. I'm not asking for an army. Just honest men willing to speak the truth." Webster studied him over the rim of his glass. "Rebecca would be proud of you. Standing up for what's right, damn the consequences. Rebecca would think I'm an idiot for getting involved in the first place. Maybe both things can be true." Webster set down his glass. "All right, I'll round up some folks. Can't promise they'll all come, but I'll try. Tomorrow afternoon before sunset. Thank you, Thomas. Don't thank me yet. We might all be burying you by week's end." Marcus returned home to find Grace waiting up, sitting at the kitchen table in the lamplight. The children were in bed, the house quiet except for the creak of settling wood. "You went to get help," she said. "Yes. I don't want anyone else hurt because of me." Marcus sat across from her, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly. "This isn't about you anymore, Grace. It's about what's right. Mercer's been terrorizing this county for years. Someone needs to stop him, and you think that someone is you." "I think I'm in a position to try. That's more than most people can say." Grace looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. The fear was still there, but beneath it was something else, determination, steel. "Then I want to testify," she said. "Tomorrow when the sheriff comes. I want to tell them everything Clayton did. Everything he is. Grace, that's dangerous. I know, but hiding is dangerous too. Running is dangerous. Everything is dangerous when men like Clayton exist." She leaned forward, her voice intense. "For 6 months I've been a victim, Marcus. I'm tired of being a victim. Let me be something else. What if the sheriff doesn't believe you? What if he sides with Mercer? Then at least I'll have spoken my truth out loud. At least my children will see their mother stand up instead of run away." Marcus understood then. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about dignity, about reclaiming agency that had been systematically stripped away. Grace needed this, needed to face her abuser with words as weapons instead of just fear. "All right," he said, "but we do it smart. We document everything. The bruises, the children's testimonies, everything Clayton did. We make it impossible for anyone to ignore." They spent the next hours preparing. Grace wrote out her statement in careful script, detailing years of abuse with dates and specifics. Charlotte added her own account, her child's handwriting shaky but determined. Even Benjamin contributed, describing the beating that had finally pushed Grace to flee. As dawn broke, Marcus found himself standing in his barn, staring at the milk cow Rebecca had loved. He'd kept the animal out of habit, even though one cow produced more milk than a single man could use. Now it fed 5 children every morning, their eager faces lighting up at the fresh cream in their porridge. Everything had changed so quickly. 1 week ago he'd been alone, merely existing. Now his house rang with children's voices. His kitchen smelled of Grace's cooking. His purpose had been reborn from ashes he'd thought long and cold, and tonight he might lose it all. The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Marcus tried to work, but found himself constantly checking the horizon. Grace moved through the house like a ghost, mechanically performing chores, while her mind clearly raced elsewhere. The children sensed the tension, their play subdued and watchful. Thomas Webster arrived in the early afternoon with 6 other ranchers. Marcus recognized them all: John Patterson, who'd lost land to Mercer's schemes; Frank Donnelly, whose daughter Mercer had tried to court before she fled to Denver; William Zhang, a Chinese immigrant who'd faced Mercer's discrimination and survived; Robert Hayes, Samuel Tucker, and James Morrison, all men who'd suffered under Mercer's shadow but lacked the courage or means to fight back alone. "This is everyone who would come," Webster said quietly. "Others wanted to, but fear won out." "7 is enough," Marcus replied. 7 witnesses can't be ignored." They gathered in Marcus's parlor, these rough frontier men suddenly awkward in the presence of Grace and her children. Grace served coffee with steady hands, playing the hostess despite everything. Charlotte stayed close to her mother, protective and wary. At precisely sunset, hoofbeats announced Mercer's arrival. This time he'd brought more men, a dozen at least, including Sheriff Henry Walsh, a round man with weak eyes and expensive boots that no lawman's salary could afford. Marcus met them in the yard, his witnesses flanking him in a silent show of solidarity. He saw Mercer's eyes narrow when he recognized the other ranchers, saw the calculation behind that cold gaze. "Brennan," Sheriff Walsh wheezed, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Mercer here has filed a complaint. Says you're harboring his family against their will. They're here willingly. Grace chose to leave her husband because he beat her and their children. She's seeking refuge, not being harbored." "That's slander," Mercer snapped. "Grace is unwell, prone to hysteria and delusions. She needs proper care, which I'm willing to provide. Let's ask her then." Marcus gestured toward the house. "Grace?" She emerged onto the porch, and Marcus heard several of the ranchers draw sharp breaths. Even with makeup covering the worst of it, her injuries were visible. The children clustered around her, and their fear of the man in the yard was palpable. "Mrs. Mercer," Sheriff Walsh said, attempting authority, "your husband says you're being held here. Is that true?" "No," Grace's voice carried clearly. "I left my husband because he beat me regularly, starved our children, and threatened to kill us if we ever tried to escape. Mr. Brennan offered us sanctuary, which I accepted willingly." "Lies," Mercer snarled. "Sheriff, arrest this woman for abandonment and this man for kidnapping." "I have written testimony," Grace continued, holding up papers. "Dated accounts of abuse spanning 11 years. I have witnesses, my own children, who can describe what their father did. And I have these." She pulled aside her shawl, revealing the bruises on her arms, the healing cut above her eye. Pulled up her sleeve to show finger-shaped marks around her wrist. "Clayton Mercer did this. And if you force me back to him, he'll do worse. He'll do it to our children too. Is that the law you serve, Sheriff? One that protects men's rights to torture their families?" Walsh looked genuinely distressed now, torn between the law he was supposed to uphold and the evidence before his eyes. "Mr. Mercer, these are serious accusations from a hysterical woman. You can't possibly believe—" "I believe her," Thomas Webster interrupted. "And I'm willing to testify to the character of both parties involved." "As am I," said John Patterson. "And I," added Frank Donnelly. One by one, the 7 ranchers declared their support for Grace, their willingness to stand as witnesses against Clayton Mercer. The balance of power shifted subtly but definitively in that moment. Mercer's face went purple with rage. "You'll all regret this. Every single one of you. I'll ruin you all." "Threatening witnesses in front of a sheriff," Marcus said mildly. "That's illegal too, isn't it, Sheriff Walsh?" Walsh's weak eyes darted between Mercer and the assembled ranchers. For once, he faced a situation where taking Mercer's side might cost more than opposing him. "Mr. Mercer," he said slowly, "perhaps it would be best if we let the courts sort this out proper. File for divorce proceedings, custody hearings, the legal way. I want my family now. And Mrs. Mercer has a right to refuse to return to a potentially dangerous situation. Until a judge rules otherwise, I can't force her to go with you. It was a small victory, temporary at best, but it was a victory nonetheless." Mercer seemed to recognize this because his rage transformed into something colder, more calculated. Very well, he said softly. We'll do this the legal way. But understand something, all of you. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, judges, politicians in my pocket. When this is over, that woman and those children will be back where they belong. And every man standing here will pay for their interference. He wheeled his horse around and rode off with his men, leaving only dust and the promise of future violence. After they left, Grace collapsed onto the porch steps, her legs finally giving out. Marcus sat beside her while the ranchers awkwardly offered their support and departed, promising to return if needed. We bought time, Marcus said quietly. That's something. Time for what? He'll bring lawyers, make it legal. I have no money, no education, no standing. The law favors husbands absolutely. Then we change the law's mind. Show them what he really is. Grace looked at him, tears streaming down her face. Why are you doing this? Really? You could give me up right now, go back to your quiet life, avoid all this trouble. Marcus thought about his answer carefully. When Rebecca died, I died too. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I was just a ghost haunting my own house. Then you and your children showed up, and suddenly I had a reason to get up in the morning. A reason to care, he met her eyes. You gave me back my life, Grace. The least I can do is fight to protect yours. She leaned against him, and Marcus put his arm around her shoulders, holding this broken woman who was becoming something more, someone stronger. Around them, the Kansas night settled in, and inside the house 5 children slept peacefully for what might be one of their last nights of safety. The legal battle had begun, and Marcus Brennan, who'd thought his story was over, found himself at the start of the greatest fight of his life. Clayton Mercer's retaliation began 3 days after the confrontation, subtle at first, then increasingly vicious. The bank manager arrived at Marcus's ranch on a Tuesday morning, apologetic but firm. Marcus's line of credit had been called in immediately. Full payment due within 30 days, or foreclosure proceedings would begin. I'm sorry, Marcus, Harold Pettigrew said, unable to meet his eyes. It's out of my hands. Orders from the regional office. Regional office that Mercer's brother-in-law runs? Pettigrew's silence was answer enough. Marcus did the calculations that night. Between the drought and his dwindling herd, he couldn't possibly raise the money in time. Mercer was systematically destroying his financial foundation and doing it legally. 2 days later, the feed supplier in Dodge City refused to sell to him. Then the grain merchant. Then the blacksmith who'd shod his horses for 5 years suddenly had no openings in his schedule, now or ever. They got to everyone, Thomas Webster confirmed, when Marcus rode to his ranch seeking advice. Mercer's spreading the word. Anyone who does business with you gets blacklisted from his operations. Since he controls half the commerce in the county, people are choosing their survival over their principles. Can't blame them for that. Maybe not. But it doesn't help you. The isolation was effective and demoralizing. Marcus watched his resources dwindle while Grace tried to hide her guilt, knowing she was the cause of his destruction. I should leave, she said one evening after the children were asleep. Take the children and disappear. At least then you could recover. And where? You have no money, no supplies, and Mercer's got eyes everywhere now. You'd last maybe 3 days before he found you. Then what do we do? Marcus had no answer. For the first time since this began, he felt the crushing weight of impossible odds. Mercer wasn't just fighting with violence. He was using the system itself as a weapon, and it was far more effective than guns. The next blow came from an unexpected direction. Charlotte fell ill on a Thursday, fever burning through her small body like wildfire. Grace tried every home remedy she knew, but the girl only worsened, her breathing becoming labored, her skin gray. We need the doctor, Grace said desperately. Please, Marcus. She needs real medicine. Doc Elijah Crane lived in Dodge City, the only trained physician within 50 miles. Marcus hitched the wagon and they made the frantic journey, Charlotte wrapped in blankets and barely conscious, Grace cradling her daughter's head in her lap. They reached the doctor's office after dark. Crane answered the door in his nightshirt, took one look at Charlotte's condition, and started to usher them inside. Then he stopped, recognition dawning. You're Brennan, the one sheltering Mercer's wife. This child needs help. Politics can wait. Crane's face twisted with genuine regret. I can't. Mercer came by yesterday. Made it clear that treating anyone associated with you would result in consequences. I've got a family, Brennan. A practice. I can't. She's 10 years old. Grace's scream cut through the night. She's dying. What kind of doctor turns away a dying child? The kind who wants to keep his license. Mercer's got connections with the Territorial Medical Board. One word from him and I'm finished. Crane's hands shook. I'm sorry, truly, but I can't help you. The door closed in their faces. Marcus stood there, Charlotte's labored breathing loud in the sudden silence. Grace's face crumpled, and he saw her start to break, the accumulated pressure finally becoming too much. There's another doctor, he said quickly. In Abilene. It's 50 miles, but we can make it if we push through the night. They drove through darkness, with only starlight to guide them. The horses pushed to their limits. Charlotte's breathing grew worse, rattling in her chest like stones in a tin can. Grace prayed aloud, bargaining with God in desperate whispers. They reached Abilene at dawn. Dr. Margaret. Fletcher was a rarity, a woman physician who'd trained in Boston and moved west to escape the rigid prejudices of Eastern medicine. She took one look at Charlotte and swept them inside without questions. Pneumonia, she diagnosed after examination. Advanced, but treatable if we act fast. She worked through the morning, administering medicines, applying poultices, monitoring Charlotte's labored breathing. Grace refused to leave her daughter's side, holding Charlotte's hand and whispering encouragement, even when the girl was too deep in fever dreams to hear. Marcus paced the waiting room, remembering another time he'd waited for a doctor's verdict, another night that had ended in death and grief. He couldn't survive losing Charlotte, not after he'd grown to care for these children as if they were his own. Near noon, Dr. Fletcher emerged. She'll live. The fever's breaking. Another few hours and we might have lost her, but she's strong. She'll recover! The relief nearly buckled Marcus's knees. Grace emerged from the treatment room, her face streaked with tears, and collapsed against him. He held her while she shook, both of them processing how close they'd come to tragedy. This is what he does, Grace whispered. Clayton destroys everything good. He'll never stop until we're broken or dead. Dr. Fletcher, overhearing, approached them. I know who you are. Word travels even to Abilene. And I know Clayton Mercer's reputation. She handed Marcus a bottle of medicine. For the next few days, keep her warm and rested. And tell anyone who asks that I'll treat whoever needs treatment, regardless of what some cattle baron thinks. He'll come after you too. Let him try. I've dealt with men who think their money makes them gods. They bleed same as anyone when you cut through the bluster. She smiled grimly. Besides, I'm friends with the territorial governor's wife. Mercer's influence has limits, even if he doesn't know it yet. They returned home to find disaster waiting. The barn had burned during their absence. Not completely. The fire had been contained before it spread to the house, but enough to destroy months of stored hay and damage the structure severely. The horses were unharmed. Someone had freed them in time, but the message was clear. Benjamin stood in the yard, soot-covered and exhausted. The twins huddled near the water pump, and little Michael clung to Thomas Webster's leg, whimpering. I tried to stop it, Benjamin said, his voice breaking. I saw the smoke, got the horses out, but the fire was too big. Mr. Webster came and helped, but we couldn't save it all. Marcus surveyed the damage, calculating losses he couldn't afford. Between the bank calling his loan and now this, he was finished financially. Mercer had won the economic war. It's not your fault, son, he told Benjamin, ruffling the boy's hair. You did good getting the horses out. That's what mattered. Grace emerged from the house with Charlotte wrapped in blankets, the girl weak but alive. She took in the burned barn, the frightened children, the wreckage of their temporary safety, and Marcus saw something break in her eyes. This is too much, she said quietly. Marcus, he's destroying you, your home, your livelihood, everything. I can't watch him ruin you because you tried to help us. Grace, no, listen to me. I'll go back to him, offer a deal. If he drops the charges against you, compensates you for the damages, I'll return. quietly. No more public accusations. Absolutely not. I'll make him promise not to hurt the children. Get it in writing somehow. It's not perfect, but it's better than watching him destroy everyone who tries to help us. Marcus grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to yourself. You're talking about going back into hell because he's making life difficult for me. That's exactly what he wants, to break you down until you surrender. What choice do we have? The barn is gone. Your credit is gone. Doctors won't treat us. We're trapped and bleeding, and he's just getting started. She was right, and they both knew it. Mercer was winning, not through violence, but through systematic destruction of everything Marcus had built. And there was no clear path to victory, no obvious strategy to fight back. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Marcus sat on the porch steps and faced the ruins of his barn. He'd built that structure with his own hands 7 years ago, back when Rebecca was alive, and the future seemed full of possibility. Now it was charred timber and ash, just like everything else he tried to hold on to. Thomas Webster found him there an hour later, carrying a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Figured you could use this, Webster said. Sitting beside him, they drank in silence, watching the stars emerge. Finally, Webster spoke. My brother got into debt once. Bad debt to bad men. They broke his hand so he couldn't work, burned his crops, killed his livestock, systematically destroyed him until he had nothing left but his life, and even that wasn't worth much by the end. Cheerful story. Point is, my brother made a mistake. He tried to fight alone. By the time he asked for help, it was too late. Everyone was too scared of the men he owed to risk helping him. And you're not alone, Marcus. You've got people willing to stand with you, but you need to let them. Stop trying to shoulder everything yourself. I'm not. Yes, you are. You took in Grace and those kids like it's your burden alone. But that woman in there? She's carrying guilt that's eating her alive. Those children are terrified they're destroying the first safe place they've found. And you're all suffering separately instead of together. Marcus turned the whiskey glass in his hands. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we get organized. Mercer's attacking because you're an isolated target. Make yourself part of something bigger. Get the community involved officially, not just as witnesses. Most folks are too scared of Mercer to help. Most isn't all. We've got 7 ranchers who stood up last week. That's a start. Add their families, that's maybe 30 people. Get the church involved, the women's auxiliary, anyone with a conscience. Build something Mercer can't destroy without destroying half the county. It was a strategy, at least. Better than slowly drowning while Mercer picked them apart, piece by piece. The next morning, Marcus called a meeting at the church. Reverend Paul Hoskins had agreed to host, one of the few men in town with enough moral authority to stand independent of Mercer's influence. 23 people came, more than Marcus had dared hope. Grace told her story to the assembled crowd, showing her scars, detailing years of abuse with quiet dignity. Charlotte spoke too, her voice still weak from her illness, describing what life had been like in her father's house. Even Benjamin added his testimony, and by the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Clayton Mercer is using his power to destroy anyone who helps us, Marcus said. He's betting that isolation and fear will force Grace back to him. But what if instead of dividing us, this brings us together? What exactly are you proposing? Asked Martha Tucker, Samuel Tucker's wife. A protection network. Share resources so no one family bears the full burden. Boycott Mercer's businesses collectively so he can't target individuals. Stand together so when he attacks one, he attacks all. That's asking people to risk everything, someone said. Yes, it is. And I understand if that's too much. But I'm asking anyway, because if we don't stop men like Mercer now, they'll keep taking and taking until there's nothing left to take. The debate went on for hours. Some people left, unwilling to risk Mercer's wrath. But others stayed. And by the end, they had 15 families committed to the cause. It wasn't an army, but it was a foundation. The network formed quickly after that. Families took turns housing Grace and the children, moving them every few days, so Mercer couldn't pin down their location. Ranchers shared feed and supplies, distributing the burden so no one person bore it all. The church created a legal fund, collecting money for lawyers and court fees. Mercer responded by escalating further. He got a court order demanding Grace appear for custody hearings. He sued Marcus for alienation of affection and property theft. He put pressure on the railroad company to refuse freight from network members. But for every attack, the network adapted. A lawyer from Kansas City, hearing about the case, offered his services pro bono. A journalist from the territorial newspaper came to interview Grace, sensing a story that could make his career. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Through it all, Marcus and Grace grew closer, bound by shared adversity. They didn't speak of feelings. There was no time, no space for romance amid the chaos. But he saw the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, felt the comfort of her presence in his kitchen, her voice reading to the children at night, her quiet strength that matched his own. One evening, 3 weeks into the battle, Grace found him alone on the porch. "Charlotte asked me today if you were going to be her new papa," she said softly. Marcus's heart lurched. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that you were a good man who was helping us, that we shouldn't assume anything. But I see how you are with them, Marcus. How Benjamin follows you around like you hung the moon. How the twins compete for your attention. How Michael only stops crying when you hold him. They're attaching to you, and you're worried about what happens when this is over. I'm worried about a lot of things, but mostly I'm worried that we're becoming a burden you'll resent. That one day you'll wake up and realize your life was simpler before 5 children invaded it." Marcus stood, moving to stand beside her at the rail. "My life was simpler. It was also empty. You and those children filled something I didn't even know was hollow. That's not love. That's gratitude and proximity. Maybe so. Or maybe it's the start of something real. Either way, I'm not resenting anything." He looked at her. "Are you?" "No," she whispered. "That's what scares me. I'm not supposed to feel this way. I'm supposed to be broken, traumatized, incapable of trusting another man. But when I'm with you, I feel safe. And that terrifies me because I don't know if it's real or just desperation making me see what I want to see." Before Marcus could respond, gunshots cracked through the night. They both dropped instinctively, and Marcus dragged Grace inside. Through the window he saw riders circling the property, firing into the air. Intimidation, not assassination, but effective nonetheless. The children woke up screaming, and Grace rushed to comfort them while Marcus grabbed his rifle. But by the time he reached the door, the riders were gone, leaving only bullet holes in his walls and a warning scrawled in the dirt. "Time's up. She comes home or everyone burns." The message was clear. Mercer's patience had ended. The real war was about to begin. The morning after the night riders, Marcus sent telegrams to every contact he had across 3 territories. If Mercer wanted war, he'd get it, but this time Marcus wasn't fighting alone. The first response came from an unexpected source. Judge Walter Harrington from Topeka, a man Marcus had served with during the war, wired back within hours, arriving in 4 days. "Bring documentation. This ends now." Grace read the telegram over Marcus's shoulder. "A judge can't help us. Mercer owns the local courts, Walter's Federal Circuit Court. He's got jurisdiction over territorial disputes, and if we can prove Mercer's been using interstate commerce to facilitate his crimes, we might have grounds for federal intervention. That's a lot of ifs and mights. It's more than we had yesterday." Thomas Webster arrived that afternoon with news. Frank Donnelly's daughter came back from Denver. Sarah Donnelly, you remember her? Mercer tried courting her 5 years ago. I remember. She left town suddenly because Mercer threatened to ruin her father's ranch when she refused his marriage proposal. She's willing to testify now, says she's got letters Mercer sent her. Threatening letters, more ammunition for their case. Slowly, piece by piece, they were building something that might actually stand up in court. Dr. Margaret Fletcher arrived unannounced the next day, her medical bag in hand. Heard about the night riders. Thought I'd check on Charlotte and see if anyone else needs treatment. She'd brought another doctor with her, a stern-faced man named Vincent Price. Military surgeon, Fletcher explained. Saw enough men like Mercer during the war. Despises bullies. Price examined Grace's healing injuries with professional detachment, photographing each bruise and scar with his new camera equipment. Evidence, he said tersely. Courts may ignore words, but they can't ignore pictures. The photographs were brutal. Grace flinched, seeing herself documented that way, her body transformed into evidence of Clayton's cruelty. But Charlotte squeezed her mother's hand. Now everyone will see what Papa really is, the girl said with satisfaction. Over the next 3 days, the network Marcus had built began to bear fruit. People came forward with their own stories of Mercer's brutality. Ranch hands who'd been beaten for minor infractions. A widow whose land Mercer had stolen through fraudulent contracts. A shopkeeper whose store mysteriously burned after he refused to extend unlimited credit to Mercer's operation. Each testimony was documented, witnessed, notarized. Martha Tucker, who taught school before marriage, organized everything into a comprehensive case file that even a hostile court would struggle to dismiss. You're building something extraordinary, Reverend Hoskins observed. Watching the community gather in his church basement, people who've been silent for years are finally finding their voice. They're just tired of being afraid, Marcus replied. Fear is a powerful silencer. It takes more courage to speak than most people realize. Judge Harrington arrived on the 4th day, accompanied by 2 federal marshals and a stenographer. He was older than Marcus remembered, hair gone white, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had made him a brilliant tactician during the war. Marcus Brennan. Harrington clasped his hand firmly. Last time I saw you, you were pulling me out of a river after Antietam. You were heavier then. War will slim a man down. Among other things, Harrington's expression sobered as he turned to Grace. Mrs. Mercer, I presume? Or do you prefer Holloway? Holloway, please. I'm done being a Mercer. Understandable. I've reviewed the preliminary documents Marcus sent. What you've experienced constitutes not just assault, but systematic torture. If half of what's documented is accurate, your husband belongs in prison, not a courtroom. Grace's eyes widened. You believe me? Mrs. Holloway, I've been a judge for 20 years. I've seen enough abused women to recognize the truth when it's presented. The question isn't whether I believe you. It's whether we can prove it sufficiently to overcome your husband's considerable influence. They spent the entire day going through the evidence. Harrington examined photographs, read testimonies, questioned witnesses with the precision of a surgeon. The federal marshals took statements, their presence lending official weight to proceedings that had felt dangerously unofficial. The challenge, Harrington explained that evening, is jurisdiction. Domestic matters typically fall to territorial courts, which Mercer controls. However, his use of railroad freight systems to move stolen goods, his documented bribes of federal postal officials, and his threats against interstate commerce give me grounds to intervene. Will it be enough? Marcus asked. If we play this correctly, yes. But Mercer will fight with every resource at his disposal. We need to be prepared for a battle that could take months, possibly years. Grace paled. Years of this? Years of looking over our shoulders, watching him destroy everyone who helps us? Or, Harrington said carefully, we force his hand now, make him act rashly, make mistakes that even corrupt judges can't ignore. How? Marcus asked. By making this public. Very public. I've already wired the Kansas City Star and the Chicago Tribune. They're sending journalists. If we can get this story into major newspapers, Mercer loses his greatest weapon, anonymity. He's terrorized this county because nobody outside it knew or cared. Once his actions are printed nationally, he becomes accountable to a much larger audience. The plan was risky. Drawing national attention meant exposing Grace and the children to scrutiny they might not survive. But continuing as they were meant slow starvation, economic and otherwise. We do it, Grace said firmly. I'm tired of hiding. Let everyone see what he is. The journalists arrived 2 days later. Daniel Morrison from the Kansas City Star was young and hungry for the story that would make his career. Elizabeth Chen from the Chicago Tribune was older, seasoned, her Chinese heritage making her naturally sympathetic to outsiders fighting powerful men. They interviewed Grace for hours, their questions probing but respectful. They photographed the children, spoke with witnesses, documented the burned barn and bullet-riddled walls. Elizabeth Chen's questions were particularly sharp, cutting through to the heart of systemic issues. "This isn't just about one abusive man," she observed. "It's about a legal system that treats women as property. That's the real story here." "Then tell that story," Grace urged. "Make people see that what happened to me happens to countless women who have nowhere to run, no one to help them." The articles would take a week to publish, time they spent fortifying their position. More families joined the network, emboldened by federal presence. Judge Harrington conducted preliminary hearings, establishing legal grounds for intervention. The marshals arrested 3 of Mercer's men on charges of arson and assault, breaking his sense of invincibility. But Mercer wasn't idle. His lawyers filed countersuits, dozens of them, attempting to overwhelm the opposition with legal complexity. They accused Marcus of kidnapping, Grace of parental abandonment, the network of conspiracy and fraud. Each accusation was baseless, but responding to them consumed time and resources. "He's trying to exhaust us," Martha Tucker said, reviewing the latest filings. "Death by 1,000 paper cuts." "Then we need to cut back," Marcus replied. The strategy session that night involved 15 people crammed into Marcus's parlor. Judge Harrington presided, his military bearing transforming civilians into soldiers. "Mercer's strength is his money and influence," Harrington began. "But money becomes worthless if nobody will take it. We need to turn his own tactics against him." "A boycott?" Thomas Webster suggested. "We've already stopped doing business with him. Bigger than that, we contact every supplier, every business partner, every political connection. Show them the evidence of what Mercer is. Make supporting him toxic." "That's asking a lot," Frank Donnelly said. "Most of those people are outside this county, beyond Mercer's immediate reach, but also beyond ours. Which is why we use the press," Elizabeth Chen interjected. "Once my article publishes, it'll be reprinted in dozens of papers. Public opinion is a powerful weapon. If we frame this correctly, Mercer becomes a pariah." Sarah Donnelly, Frank's daughter, raised her hand tentatively. "I know some of Mercer's business associates, women married to his partners. If I reached out to them, told them what he's really like, they might pressure their husbands to distance themselves." "That's dangerous," her father protested. "So is doing nothing. Besides, I'm not the scared girl who ran away anymore. I can handle Clayton Mercer's anger." The plan took shape over several hours. A coordinated campaign using legal pressure, public exposure, economic boycott, and social ostracism. It was ambitious, possibly doomed, but it was something. Grace contributed her own knowledge. Clayton has a business partner in Topeka, Richard Sterling. They've been friends since childhood. If Sterling turned on him, it would devastate Clayton. "He actually cares what Sterling thinks. Why would Sterling turn?" Marcus asked. "Because Sterling's wife, Anne, left him 2 years ago. Took their children and fled to Boston. I heard Clayton laughing about it once, calling Anne weak and hysterical. If Anne knew what Clayton did to me, if she saw that she wasn't alone," Elizabeth Chen was already writing. "Get me Anne Sterling's address. I'll interview her, draw the connection. 2 powerful men, 2 abused wives. That's a pattern, not an isolated incident." The network grew more complex, threads connecting across territories and states. Each person brought new information, new allies, new possibilities. What had started as one man sheltering one family had evolved into something much larger, a coordinated resistance against a system that enabled men like Clayton Mercer. Benjamin approached Marcus during a quiet moment. "Are we winning?" the boy asked. Marcus considered lying, offering easy reassurance. But Benjamin deserved the truth. "We're fighting. That's not the same as winning, but it's better than surrendering. Papa always wins. He says winners do whatever it takes. Your papa's wrong. Real winners do what's right, even when it's hard." Even when it costs them everything, Benjamin absorbed this. You're going to lose your ranch because of us, aren't you? Maybe, but I'd rather lose my ranch and keep my soul than keep my ranch and lose it. The boy nodded slowly. Mama says you're the best man she's ever known. Your mama's been through a lot. Her judgment might be impaired. I don't think so. I think she sees you clear. That conversation stayed with Marcus through the following days as preparations continued. Grace's presence had become so natural, he couldn't remember what his house felt like without her voice in the kitchen, her footsteps on the stairs, her quiet strength anchoring everyone. One evening, he found her alone on the porch, staring at the sunset. He sat beside her without speaking, comfortable in shared silence. "If we win," she said eventually. "If Clayton goes to prison and we're free, what happens then?" "What do you want to happen?" "I don't know. 6 months ago I was just trying to survive. I didn't have the luxury of wanting anything beyond the next safe place to hide. Now," she trailed off, Now I have to imagine a future. And that's terrifying because every time I've hoped for something, it's been taken away." Marcus understood. Hope was dangerous when you'd learned to live without it. Wanting something meant giving it power to hurt you. "I can't promise you forever," he said carefully. "I can't guarantee we'll win, or that life will be easy, or that we'll all survive what's coming. But I can promise you this, whatever happens, you won't face it alone." Grace turned to look at him, and in the fading light, he saw tears on her cheeks. "That's more than I've had in a long time. It's less than you deserve." She leaned against him, and Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her as the Kansas sky blazed red and gold. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight, in this moment, they had each other and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something good from all this ruin. Inside, the children were laughing at something Charlotte had said. The sound carried through the open window, pure and joyful, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This was what they were fighting for, not just survival, but the possibility of joy. The chance for Grace to laugh without fear, for the children to grow up knowing safety, for all of them to discover who they could be when violence no longer defined their existence. Judge Harrington appeared in the doorway. "Articles published tomorrow morning. Once they hit the stands, there's no going back. Mercer will know we've gone national and he'll retaliate with everything he has." Marcus and Grace exchanged looks, a full conversation passing between them without words. "We're ready," Grace said. Harrington nodded. "Then God help us all, because we're about to kick the hornet's nest and see what flies out." The die was cast. Tomorrow, the whole nation would read about Clayton Mercer's crimes. And tomorrow, Clayton Mercer would strike back with the fury of a man who'd been publicly exposed. The final battle was about to begin. The articles hit newsstands at dawn. By noon, the territory was in an uproar. Elizabeth Chen's piece in the Chicago Tribune was devastating. "The tyranny of cattle barons, how one Kansas rancher's reign of terror exemplifies systematic abuse." She'd drawn connections between Clayton Mercer and similar cases across the West, transforming Grace's personal nightmare into a broader indictment of unchecked power. Daniel Morrison's Kansas City Star article took a different approach, focusing on the children. 5 starving children and the cowboy who defied an empire to save them. His prose was emotional, designed to outrage middle-class readers who might otherwise dismiss frontier violence as someone else's problem. Both articles included Dr. Price's photographs, Grace's bruises, the burned barn, the bullet holes in Marcus's walls, images that made abstract cruelty concrete and undeniable. Clayton Mercer's response was immediate and volcanic. He arrived at Marcus's ranch at 10 in the morning with 20 armed men, his face purple with rage. Judge Harrington and the federal marshals were already there, having anticipated exactly this reaction. "You destroyed me," Mercer screamed, barely coherent. Every business associate, every political connection, they're all distancing themselves. "My bank accounts are frozen pending federal investigation. My shipping contracts have been cancelled." "You've ruined everything." "No," Judge Harrington said calmly. You ruined yourself through years of criminal behavior. We simply documented it. I want my wife and children, now, or I'll burn this entire county to ash. Mr. Mercer, you're threatening arson and murder in front of federal marshals and a circuit court judge. I strongly suggest you reconsider your words, but Mercer was past reason. He'd spent his entire life believing money made him untouchable, and discovering he was wrong had shattered something fundamental. He turned to his hired guns. Take them. Kill anyone who stops you. The marshals drew their weapons. Marcus and the other ranchers did the same. For a suspended moment, violence hung in the air like thunder before lightning strikes. Then a voice cut through the tension. Papa, no! Charlotte stepped onto the porch, Grace trying to pull her back, but the girl shook off her mother's hand. She walked down the steps with the fearless certainty of a child who'd already survived the worst and found courage on the other side. Charlotte. Get back inside, Mercer commanded. No! The single word carried absolute defiance. I'm not scared of you anymore. You will obey me. I'm your father. You're not my father. Fathers protect their children. They don't beat them or starve them or make them wish they were dead. Charlotte's voice rang clear and strong. Mr. Brennan is more of a father than you ever were. He feeds us. He teaches us. He holds us when we have nightmares about you. Mercer's face contorted. You ungrateful little... I'm grateful, Charlotte interrupted. Grateful Mama finally got us away from you. Grateful we found someone good. And I'm grateful the whole world now knows what you really are. Benjamin emerged from the house next, then the twins, then little Michael clutching Marcus's pant leg. 5 children standing together, no longer victims but witnesses to their own liberation. We're not going back, Benjamin said, his voice steady. You can't make us. Something in Mercer snapped. He lunged toward the children, and several things happened simultaneously. Grace threw herself between Mercer and the kids. Marcus moved to intercept. The marshals shouted commands, and Mercer, in his blind rage, drew a pistol. The shot echoed across the prairie. Grace fell, clutching her shoulder where Mercer's bullet had struck. The children screamed. Marcus caught Grace before she hit the ground, and the marshals tackled Mercer, disarming him as he fought like a rabid animal. Mama! Charlotte dropped to her knees beside Grace, whose blood was already soaking through her dress. I'm all right, Grace gasped, though her face was white with shock and pain. Just my shoulder. I'm all right. Dr. Price was there instantly, tearing away fabric to examine the wound. Clean through, missed the bone and major vessels. She'll survive. Mercer struggled against the marshals holding him. She's mine. They're all mine. You can't take what's mine. Clayton Mercer. Judge Harrington's voice cut through the chaos. With judicial authority, you are under arrest for attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, fraud, and about 15 other charges I'll enumerate once you're in federal custody. Marshal Reeves, take him away. As the marshals dragged Mercer toward their wagon, he screamed threats and curses, his carefully constructed facade of respectability completely destroyed. His hired guns, seeing their employer arrested and their payment uncertain, dropped their weapons and scattered. Without Mercer's money backing them, they were just cowards who'd traded conscience for coin. Inside, Dr. Price worked on Grace's wound while the children clustered close, needing to see their mother was truly alive. Marcus held Michael, who was crying silently, his small body shaking. You saved them, Marcus told Grace softly. You stepped into a bullet to save your children. Any mother would. She winced as Price extracted fabric from the wound. Not every mother does. You're extraordinary. I'm terrified. If that bullet had been 6 inches to the right, but it wasn't. You're here. You're alive. And Mercer's in custody facing charges that will put him away for decades. Grace looked at her children, at Charlotte holding her hand, at Benjamin standing guard, at the twins pressed against her side, at Michael in Marcus's arms. Is it really over? The immediate danger, yes. There'll be trials, legal proceedings, probably years of complications. But the part where you're running and hiding and terrified? That's over. Dr. Price finished bandaging the wound. Keep it. Clean, change dressings twice daily, and for God's sake, rest. You've been shot, woman. Act like it. I have 5 children to care for. You have a community to help, Martha Tucker said from the doorway. She'd arrived with several other women, bringing supplies and food. You've been carrying everything alone for too long, Grace. Let us help. Over the following hours, the house filled with people, families from the network, bringing support and celebration. The immediate threat had ended, and the relief was palpable. Children played in the yard, while adults discussed the legal proceedings ahead. Thomas Webster pulled Marcus aside. Your barn needs rebuilding. I've got lumber I can spare, and I'm guessing others do too. We could have it up in a week with enough hands. Thomas, I can't ask. You're not asking. I'm offering. You stood up when the rest of us were too scared. Least we can do is help you recover what was lost. Frank Donnelly joined them. I've been thinking about that bank loan Mercer got called in. With him in federal custody and his assets frozen, that pressure's gone. Might be able to renegotiate. Terms now that the regional office isn't taking his orders. Even if you can't, John Patterson added, we've been talking. 15 families pooling resources could cover your debts until you get back on your feet. Marcus felt something crack in his chest. For 3 years, he'd been isolated by grief, convinced he had to face everything alone. These people were teaching him a different way. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank us. Just keep being the kind of man worth helping. As evening fell, the crowd dispersed, leaving Marcus alone with Grace and the children. Grace was resting on the sofa, her arm in a sling, looking exhausted but peaceful. The children had finally calmed, processing the day's events in their own ways. Marcus found Charlotte on the porch, staring at the stars. That was brave, he told her, what you did today. I was scared. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Are you going to marry Mama? The question caught him off guard. Why do you ask? Because you look at her the way Papa used to look at his horses, like she's valuable. But also the way Benjamin looks at the stars, like she's beautiful. It's confusing. Marcus sat beside her. Your Mama's been through a lot. She needs time to heal before thinking about things like marriage. But you want to. I can tell. Yes, Marcus admitted. But wanting something and doing something are different. Your Mama gets to decide her own future now. That's the whole point of everything we've fought for. What if she decides she wants you? Then I'd be the luckiest man in Kansas. Charlotte leaned against him, and Marcus put his arm around her shoulders. I'm glad we climbed in your wagon that day. So am I. Inside, Grace had fallen asleep, her face peaceful despite everything. Benjamin was reading to the twins from one of Marcus's books, his voice serious and careful. Michael had curled up next, to his mother, thumb in his mouth, finally feeling safe enough to truly rest. Judge Harrington appeared in the doorway. Beautiful sight, isn't it? A family that almost wasn't. Will Mercer really go to prison? Attempted murder in front of a federal judge and 2 marshals? He'll be lucky if he doesn't hang. Add in the fraud, conspiracy, and everything else. And Clayton Mercer will spend the rest of his life behind bars. What about Grace's legal status? She's still technically his wife. Divorce proceedings begin next week. With Mercer's criminal conviction, no judge in the territory will oppose it. She'll be free, Marcus. Truly free. After Harrington left, Marcus stood on the porch watching the prairie settle into night. The burned barn was still there, a reminder of what they'd survived. But tomorrow, rebuilding would begin. Not just the barn, but everything. Grace found him there an hour later, moving carefully because of her injured shoulder. You should be resting, Marcus said. I needed to talk to you while I still have the courage. About? Grace took a breath. The children think you're going to propose to me. They've been discussing it for days, apparently. Charlotte has opinions about what kind of wedding dress I should wear. Marcus felt heat rise in his face. I told Charlotte that any decisions about the future are yours to make. That was diplomatic of you. Grace moved to stand beside him at the rail. Here's what I've been thinking. 6 months ago, I escaped a marriage that was really a prison. I swore I'd never put myself in a man's power again, never trust another man with my life or my children's lives. I understand. I'm not finished. Then I met you, and you fed my starving children, sheltered us when we had nowhere to go, risked everything to protect us from a monster, stood between us and violence repeatedly, and never, not once, demanded anything in return. She turned to face him. You gave me back my agency, Marcus, the right to choose, to decide, to be a person instead of property. That's worth more than you know, Grace. So here's my choice. When this is over, when the legal proceedings are done and I'm officially free, I want to stay. Not out of gratitude or desperation or because I have nowhere else to go, but because I want to build a life here, with you, if you'll have us. Marcus stared at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his life and changed everything. Are you sure? After everything you've been through, you'd trust another man with your heart? I'm not trusting blindly. I'm choosing deliberately. I know who you are, Marcus Brennan. I've seen you at your best and your worst. I've watched you with my children, seen how you treat people, observed how you face adversity. You're not Clayton. You're not any version of him. I'm not perfect either. I'm stubborn and closed off and good, fundamentally deeply good. That's enough for me. Marcus reached for her hand, careful of her injured shoulder. I need you to know something. What I feel for you isn't just about filling the emptiness Rebecca left. You're not a replacement for what I lost. You're something entirely new. What am I? You're the future. The possibility I thought was gone. Your strength and courage and stubborn hope. Your every reason to keep fighting, keep building, keep believing life can be more than just survival. Grace smiled, tears in her eyes. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Really? Because I have a whole speech prepared about how your cooking is superior to mine, and how the children listen to you better than they listen to me. She laughed, the sound pure and unguarded. Save the speech for the proposal. You're sure you want a proposal? Eventually. After I'm legally free. After we've had time to build something real without desperation driving it. But yes, Marcus, eventually I'd very much like a proposal. He kissed her then, gentle and careful of her injuries, and felt her lean into him. Behind them, through the window, 5 children pretended not to watch, while obviously watching, and Marcus heard Charlotte whisper triumphantly, I told you he'd kiss her. When they broke apart, Grace was smiling. We've scandalized the children. They'll survive, will you? Being an instant father to 5 children. I survived war, grief, and Clayton Mercer. I think I can handle 5 kids. You say that now. They stood together, watching the stars emerge. 2 people who'd found each other at exactly the moment they both needed saving. Tomorrow would bring trials and rebuilding and all the complicated work of actually living. But tonight, with danger finally behind them and possibility stretching ahead, they had earned this moment of peace. Inside, the children settled for the night, their voices raised in some argument about bedtime. Grace sighed. I should go to the referee. Want help? Always. They walked inside together, and Marcus thought about how empty this house had been just weeks ago, how silence had been his only companion, how he'd been waiting to die without admitting it. Now the house rang with life and argument and laughter. 5 children who needed raising. A woman who'd chosen him deliberately. A future that terrified and excited him in equal measure. The barn would be rebuilt. The debts would be managed. Clayton Mercer would face justice. And somehow, from all the ruin and violence, something good had grown, something worth fighting for, something worth living for, something like hope. 3 months after Clayton Mercer's conviction, the newly rebuilt barn stood against the Kansas sky, larger and stronger than before. Marcus and Benjamin stepped back to admire their work, both covered in sawdust. Sometimes things need to break before they can become what they were meant to be, Marcus said. Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. Like Mama, the trial had ended with 17 guilty verdicts and a 25-year sentence. Grace had testified with quiet strength, and when the judge's gavel fell, she'd simply walked out into sunlight as a free woman. The divorce, finalized 2 days later, made it official. Grace Holloway, no longer anyone's property. Judge Harrington arrived that afternoon with unexpected news. 2 men in suits accompanied him, representatives from the Territorial Land Office. Mrs. Holloway, the first man began as they gathered in the parlor. Clayton Mercer's assets have been liquidated for victim restitution. You're entitled to $47,000 plus the deed to his ranch. Grace went pale. I don't want anything from that place. It's not his anymore. It's compensation for what you survived. Charlotte, listening from the hallway, entered cautiously. Does this mean we're rich? That we could leave? Grace pulled her daughter close. I've had choices since Mr. Brennan opened his door. I chose to stay then, and I choose to stay now. This is home. Over the following weeks, Grace made decisions that reflected who she'd become. The Mercer Ranch was sold to smaller ranchers, ending the monopoly that had terrorized the county. She established trust funds for each child's education, then used the remainder in ways that honored her journey. Funding a women's shelter in Dodge City, endowing scholarships for girls, supporting Dr. Fletcher's clinic. You're giving it all away, Marcus observed. I'm investing it in the future I want to see. The Kansas Women's Protection Society invited Grace to speak at their annual convention. Standing before 200 women in Topeka, she told her story with trembling hands but a steady voice. For 11 years I believed I had no choice but to endure, she said. But we always have choices, even terrible ones. I chose to run. I got lucky. I found help. Not every woman will. That's why we need laws that protect us, courts that believe us, communities that support us. The applause was thunderous. Women lined up afterward to share their own stories, seeking the hope Grace embodied. On the train home, she leaned against Marcus's shoulder. I want to do more. Write, travel, help establish shelters in other territories. Then you should, Marcus said firmly. I didn't save you from one prison to build you another. If this is your calling, pursue it. We'll be here when you return. 6 months after Mercer's conviction, Marcus proposed. Not during some elaborate plan, but on an ordinary Tuesday evening, while Grace washed dishes, humming to herself, flower in her hair. He simply turned her to face him and dropped to one knee in the soapy puddle on the floor. Grace Holloway, will you marry me? She stared at him, hands dripping dishwater. Now, you're proposing now. I'm covered in flour. You're beautiful. This moment is perfect. Tears streamed down her face. Yes, yes, you ridiculous man. The children burst through the door. They'd obviously been watching, and piled onto them in a chaotic embrace. The twins shrieked, Michael clapped without understanding why, and Charlotte cried happy tears. They married in spring, exactly 1 year after Grace and the children had climbed into Marcus's wagon. The entire county attended the ceremony on the ranch. Judge Harrington officiated, beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife. Marcus, kiss your bride before these children expire from anticipation. He did, to cheers from 200 witnesses. When they broke apart, the twins were already demanding cake. The celebration lasted into the evening. Sarah Donnelly announced her own engagement. Dr. Fletcher shared plans for a second clinic. Elizabeth Chen revealed her article had been nominated for a national award and inspired investigations across the country. As sunset painted the prairie gold, Grace stood watching their guests with peaceful contentment. A year ago, I had nothing but 5 starving children and hope hanging by a thread, she said. Now I have everything. We built it together, Marcus replied. They watched Charlotte teaching younger children to dance, her confidence unrecognizable from the terrified girl who'd hidden in a wagon. Watched the twins playing freely. Watched Michael sleeping peacefully in Thomas Webster's arms. I want more children, Grace said suddenly. Ours, together. I want to know what it feels like to carry a child conceived in love. As many as you want, Marcus promised. Years passed in the way they do, marked by seasons and harvests, births and celebrations, hardships weathered together. Grace and Marcus had 3 more children, twin girls named Rebecca and Margaret, and a son they named Thomas. The original 5 thrived beyond anyone's expectations. Charlotte earned a scholarship to college in Massachusetts, studying mathematics and social reform. She returned each summer to help expand the shelter network Grace had founded. Benjamin took over ranch operations with his father's integrity and mother's wisdom. Samuel became a doctor, inspired by Dr. Fletcher. Sarah became a teacher, establishing schools in underserved communities. Michael surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer specializing in family law, advocating for women and children with the passion of someone who'd lived the consequences of inequality. Grace's shelter network grew across 3 territories, providing refuge to thousands. She became a sought-after speaker, her testimony instrumental in passing laws that gave women legal protections and divorce rights. On their 10th anniversary, Marcus and Grace stood on the porch watching grandchildren play in the yard. Benjamin's children were teaching fence roping. Charlotte's daughter was reading to Michael's son under the oak tree planted the year they married. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Taking in 5 strangers who invaded your wagon." Marcus grinned. "Every single day." She pulled back, shocked, until she saw his expression. "I regret that I didn't find you sooner, that you suffered so long before finding your way here." From the yard, a small voice stage whispered, "Grandma and Grandpa are kissing again." "They're married," came the matter-of-fact reply. "That's what married people do." Grace and Marcus laughed, the labels of Grandma and Grandpa still feeling wonderfully strange. They'd built something extraordinary, a family defined not just by blood, but by choice, by love, by determination to create something better. The barn stood strong, expanded twice. The house had grown with additions for visiting children and grandchildren. The land prospered under Benjamin's sustainable management, but their greatest legacy was simpler. They'd proven change was possible, that abusers could face justice, that victims could become survivors, survivors could become advocates, and advocates could reshape society. The story of the cowboy who found 5 starving children and their mother who whispered, "Please take me too," became a legend across territories. It was studied in law schools as a landmark case for women's rights. But for Marcus and Grace, it was simply their life, the foundation of everything good that followed. As the sun set on their anniversary, painting the prairie in amber and rose, they remained on the porch, content in each other's presence. "Thank you," Grace said softly, "for opening your door, for not turning us away." Marcus kissed her forehead. "Thank you for knocking, for being brave enough to ask for help, for choosing to stay when you finally had freedom to leave." Below, children's laughter rang out clear and bright, the sound of joy unencumbered by fear, the sound of everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built. And in that moment, with their family surrounding them and the future stretching endlessly ahead, Marcus and Grace knew that extraordinary journeys often begin with simple acts of compassion. A wagon door opened to desperation, a hand extended in kindness, a choice to help when help was needed most. And from that single moment of mercy, an entire world of possibility was born. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.